Madam First Vice President, we are live.
Excellent. Good evening, good evening, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for the What Does It Take to Own a Home webinar hosted by our very own Camden County East NAACP Women in the NAACP WIN committee. I know it's very long, but you will get used to that committee as they have a host of events happening all month long for Women's History Month. We will not waste any of your time and get right to tonight's events on how to secure a home and build wealth in our community, particularly for women of color. First up, we have our very own NAACP member and friend. She is the mortgage loan expert here in our area. She can help you secure the bag for that new home. And I like to call her the money lady. You know, she can help you get that money you need. Her name is Diane Frank. Please take it away.
Thank you, Charnay. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you everyone for being on tonight. I just want to start off by mentioning the Title VIII Act of the Civil Rights Act of 1968. This act prohibits the discrimination of buying and selling of real estate at any kind. Okay. In 2018, complaints have risen by 8%. So we have work to do. It's 52 years later, and we're still fighting this battle. I'm going to go through the loan process with you for people that have no idea what the process is. I am a loan officer, so I am the sales force for brokers. First, I will do your interview, and that is to get you pre-approved. The pre-approval process starts off with evaluating some things. First, of course, and foremost is your credit. The credit is the number one aspect of a pre-approval. You should be over a 620. There is some houses that go down to a 580, but with that 580, you can't have a lot of debt. You should always know your credit score. You should always be monitoring your credit score. There's 3 credit bureaus, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. Make an account with them. You can go directly to their sites, Experian.com and so forth, and create an account and know what your credit scores are. The mortgage industries, that's what we use. We go by your middle score. So middle score meaning if you're a 601, 602, or 603, your credit score is a 602. So that's what we use. We do a hard pull. Okay. We also look at, there's some certain other things that we look at. If you have filed bankruptcy, okay, you have to be 2 years out of discharge to be able to qualify for a mortgage. Not when you filed it, but out of discharge. If you had a home in that bankruptcy, it's 3 years, okay? Also, if you own student loans, if you owe student loans, if you're in default, rather, in student loans, you have to be in a payment plan and have paid on that for 3 months. The same with the IRS and taxes. If you owe them, you have to be in a payment plan and have paid on it for 3 months. And then you're able to get able to get a home. If you have foreclosed in the past, there's always a comeback. I mean, we're women, you know, and things happen with your credit. There's always a comeback. So don't be discouraged, just do the work. Okay, so again, in that pre-approval, I'm looking at your credit. I'm also looking at cash. Believe it or not, people come to me with no cash. You have to have cash to buy a home. Okay, there are loan programs out there. What I say to that is if you're using the program, understand the program. Some of those programs are second lien on your home. So you want to understand them and know them. And also those programs, your interest rate is higher. So you are paying, even though they might dangle that $10,000 up front for you, but you're paying for it. But again, be prepared. If you have a 401k, a pension, stocks or bonds, you can borrow from that from your down payment and you're not penalized because you're buying a home. Okay, so there's other ways to get cash. You can also get a gift from an immediate family member to help you. That's also allowed. So there's different things. We also look at your employment history. You have to be in the same field for 2 years. If you're a teacher and you went from school to school, that's fine. But if you were a teacher and then you decided to be a real estate agent, you have to be a real estate agent for 2 years. So again, you have to be in the same field for 2 years. So then we wrap up the pre-approval. I tell you how much you can go up to based on your income. Obviously, I need pay stubs and I need tax returns your last 2 years and W-2s. Based on that, I do a pre-approval. Then you go house shop. You have a realtor, you go house shop, and Sharkeish will go through that process with you. You come back to me with a contract, a signed contract from both parties, and then the actual application starts. In the application, I'm getting all the documentation that you told me about in the pre-approval, the bank statements, the 401k statements, your stocks or bonds, the gift letter, all that's compiled, and I send this all to processing. Processing is going to order your title. They're going to order your appraisal. And, in the beginning, you are responsible for paying out for the appraisal in the beginning of the process and your inspection on your own. This is done in the beginning of the process. So you are responsible for that. So in the processing, all that happens. Then it goes to the underwriter. The underwriter is the person who actually approves the mortgage for the loan. They're going to dot every I, cross every T. So if you have in your bank account, if you have anything coming in to your bank account that is a lump sum, you'll just have to explain it. And then the underwriter will give you a mortgage commitment and a clear to close. When you get to the clear to close, that's what everybody wants to hear. You get to closing, you can't come to closing with a car full of cash. Okay, everything has to be traced. That's what underwriter is looking for. Every dollar in your account has to be traced. So you bring a cashier's check and you get your keys and and you have your home. So that's the long to short of the process of the mortgage. But I'm here if you have any more questions about that.
Thank you for that, Diane. Right now, we want to take some questions from the audience, and it looks like someone wants to know, is it discriminatory for a lender to ask questions about race, ethnicity, etc.? It sounds a little bit suspect. Can you explain a little bit more?
Absolutely not. As a matter of fact, in 2010, Obama created what's called the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and that monitors all things real estate. So he put that in place for those questions to be asked. We want to know who the lenders are lending to, okay, and their race, ethnicity, and gender. So that's a way of keeping track of who the banks are lending to. So do not be alarmed if someone asks you that. A lot of times when you're dealing with your loan officer, you're doing it on the phone, so they may never meet you. If you refuse to answer those questions, if you can refuse to answer the questions, but if you don't, they're going to put something down based off of your surname. Every application has to have this information, and that is just a monitoring factor that goes to the government every quarter. If a lender is grossing over $10 million a year, they're required to give those statistics. So that's a good thing. We want that.
Okay. And, the NAACP has housing as one of their top priorities, especially the state NAACP. And so we want to make sure that we get as many Black people, women of color, people of color in homes. And so if you had to give them one, lesson or tip of advice, what would that be in terms of locking in a loan their first try?
Your credit. Your credit is huge. It's just such a important part. You should be conscious of your credit, whether you're getting a home or not. But your credit, there's several things. Like I mentioned earlier, if you file bankruptcy, but your credit is so, so important because that can knock you out in the beginning. So you want to have over that 620 credit score to be able to, lend your home. And then too, think about if you're asked to put something in your name, a car or, a house or something, just know what that's going to do to you, because what we look at is a debt to income ratio. And a lot of times, I pull credit and they'll say, oh, well, I helped my brother out, or I helped, just realize what that's doing to you. So you might kind of price yourself out by helping others. It's a nice gesture, but, just think twice about it.
Yes, for sure. We all know about that. We have one last question, Diane, and then we'll move on. But our attendee, Miss Jasmine, would like to know if any loan practices have changed during COVID. It's a pandemic and everything is virtual now. What seems like everything is virtual. People are furloughed or may be out off of work. Some policies may have, changed. Is that the case with, securing a mortgage during these times? Do people still have to follow the traditional rules during COVID to lock in?
We are taking in consideration of last year of 2020. If you do have a break in your work history because you had to be home with your kids or your job closed, but as long as you're back working, we will take that in consideration. So that 2 years, doesn't have to be so consistent. Anytime after March, if there's a gap in the income, we definitely will, consider that and make amends for that. And also with the appraisers, sometimes, obviously when March came, the appraisers weren't going into the home. Okay, so they were doing maybe what they call drive-bys and using comparables without, actually going into the home because of COVID. So there are some things that were adjusted.
Okay. I know I said one last question, but we really have a great question that came in from an attendee that wants to know if, lenders, in your experience, how are they assessed? How do we know that, you guys are being held accountable outside of, taking, questionnaires based on the Fair Housing Act and Civil Rights Act? Like, what are some practices at your workplace to make sure that people are, treating individuals fairly?
Besides that report we have that we have to report to the government, individual loan officers, or we have what's called, and what every realtor has is an NMLS number. You can go to the Department of Banking in New Jersey, and if we've had complaints, it will be on there. They'll give us a rating, or they'll show that if we didn't have any complaints, that's fine as far as a loan officer individually. But you can also, if you're a lender in itself, a bank or a lender that you're considering, you can Google them. You can look at the Better Business Bureau, see if there's any complaints about them, see if they've been sued. Freedom Mortgage was actually sued a couple of years back for not asking those questions that I was talking about earlier, as far as race and gender. The government's serious about these type of things. So they were fined over millions of dollars for that, because we know Freedom Mortgage, you hardly ever even meet your lender. Usually now, like, I go to closings, lenders don't necessarily have to all the time go to closings, but, I will meet, my people if I've pre-approved them or work with them on the phone. So I do meet people at closings.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Diane. That was fantastic. And just for all of our attendees, do not be afraid if you did not catch the beginning of this program. Everything is streamed to Facebook Live, and we also are recording this, and we plan on sharing it after tonight. So this information will be available. We'll also be providing you with some resources from Black women owned or Black woman run services related to real estate as well. And of course, all of our panelists will be on that list. Next up, we have Miss Char Taylor. She is a local licensed real estate agent here in New Jersey. She is amazing, and she has some really great information about how to lock in the right realtor and what to look for when finding the perfect home. So Char, take it from here.
Thanks, Charnay, for that introduction. I just want to let everyone know that there is a housing gap between Black homeowners versus white home ownership. Just in the first quarter of 2020, the Washington Post reported that the Census Bureau had Black home ownership at 44%, which was about 30% less than white homeowners. The state of New Jersey, however, we're not that bad on a national level, but there is room for improvement. Amongst the 50 states, New Jersey ranks 16th. However, we are lower than Pennsylvania, which is at 42.3%, Delaware, which is at 49.8%, Maryland, which is at 51.8%. However, we are higher than New York, which is at 31.1%, and that was reported by New Jersey Future. So let's get started. How can I get you on the right path to home ownership? So the first thing you're going to do once you're pre-approved, you need to figure out a location as to where you want to live. Your realtor is there to guide you, not decide for you. And by that, I mean, when you're looking for a location, there are a few things you need to take into consideration. First, you want to figure out how, depending on where you work, how far are you willing to travel to and from your work location? How far do you want to travel to and from your daycare or school for your kids? And how far do you want to travel to places that you frequently visit? Those are things that your realtor can help you to help narrow down your search. Because if you were to just say, I want to live, for instance, in Camden County, that could mean you want to live in Pennsauken, or maybe you want to live, in Voorhees. So it all depends, and your realtor is there to help you get to narrow down your search. And then, of course, you want to know, how do you find a realtor? So there are a few things that you can take into consideration. Of course, there's always Zillow and Realtor.com, which offers plenty of realtors. You don't always need to choose the first person that pops up on those sites, because those person pay for those zip codes. That does not mean that they are very knowledgeable in those areas. That does not mean that they've even sold many homes in that area. What it means is that they're paying those websites the most money for those zip codes. And then, of course, there's always referrals. I always think the best thing to do is ask your family, your friends, as well as coworkers, who did they use to help buy their homes? And with that, if they don't remember their realtor, then chances are that's not a realtor you want to use. Realtors are in the business of building relationships. They communicate with their clients even after they help them find the home. Communication doesn't stop. They build relationships, friendships, because when those people go to move from the homes that they're already in, you want to be on top of mind for those people. You want them to continue to use you and refer you to other things. And then, of course, you can always choose a realtor from an ad. And then, of course, once you find a realtor, you go and search for your home. Now, how are we searching for homes in this COVID environment? Things have changed. So, of course, there's virtual tours where you can look at a video of a home and just, go through each room. And then, of course, there's the traditional way where now we just wear masks and have hand sanitizer, and we can go into the homes and actually look. And then there's also live virtual tours where people can, where, you know, the realtor can be in the home and FaceTime you, and you do a live tour through the house. And as far as sending homes, me personally, I'm a techie person, so I use an app to send people homes, but there's, you know, everyone has their own different way. Once you find the home, you're gonna sign contracts, and, you know, and then you'll have, once everything is signed, you'll have a 3-day attorney review, which I'll leave to the legal expert to explain to you how the attorney review process works. But then after that, you have your home inspection. Your home inspection will be anywhere from 10 to 14 days. Of course, you can always pass on a home inspection, but I strongly, strongly advise against that, because that is a very important aspect of buying a home, because there will be things that you cannot see to the human eye that a home inspector can see. So that's a very, very important aspect of home purchasing. After you complete your home inspection, there will be an appraisal. Depending on which type of loan you have, the appraisal can be, you can be locked in, because now, since we do have a shortage of homes, people are buying homes, you know, higher than asking price. But you have to remember that house is appraised. So you don't want to get locked in to a home that appraises less than what you're paying, because, like I said, depending on what type of loan you have, you can be stuck at that price. But then there's also, you know, if you have an FHA loan, it's, you know, they have to sell you the house for whatever it appraises at. And then once the appraisal is complete, you're going to go sign your mortgage, get your deed, be at the closing table, and I will hand you your keys. If there's any questions, I'm here. And again, thank you.
Thank you so much, Char. We are currently taking questions, guys. Please utilize that question and answer box. We're also fielding questions from Facebook Live. We want to thank you, everybody. There's been a wave of people who have just joined us at this time. Let's see. Oh, we actually have a question for, I think this question is, you all can chime in on this if you would like to, but they really want to know, how has COVID impacted, you know, everyone's experience? Should people on the buyer side, should they wait until COVID is over to search for a home, or, you know, lock in a pre-approval, or should they do it now? What do you guys think?
Well, right now, the rates are really low. They're low, and this is what's creating all of this buying frenzy. Okay. There's more inventory, there's less inventory and more buyers, but people are taking advantage of these interest rates. So that is why, and, you know, now that we have a new president, you know, things might get more stable. The interest rates might start creeping up again, you know, so, you know, but still, they're still really good. I mean, I have, you know, rental property that is a 7%, you know, and that was back, you know, 7-8 years ago. You know what I mean? Like, so these rates, we're in the 3s, we're in the 2s. These are excellent rates. You know, people get stuck over, you know, my rate. And, you know, of course it's an important thing, but right now, and in perspective, these rates are awesome. So I don't think that COVID really is impacting. If anything, it's helping, you know, because of the president that we had, it's helping. The rates are based off of what comes out of Wall Street, because they're, you know, real estate indexes, and that's how they get the rate. And that's a whole nother, you know, story. But the interest rates right now are great. So if you're looking to buy, you know, you should be out there right now, you know, put yourself out there and see what happens.
And since you are actually talking, Diane, We have another question that came in for you. How do lenders look at self-employed individuals when looking for a home?
Self-employment, we're obviously, we get your records, we get your earnings. The thing about self-employment is what you deduct in expenses. We look at what you did, we look at the number after your deductions. So, you know, one time I had a buyer who made over, 100,000. He was an Uber driver, but he wrote off everything, so after all his expenses he wrote off, I was only looking at like $30,000. So you have to keep that in mind. We know that you can take, if you're self-employed, you can take certain deductions, which is perfectly legal and fine, but just know if you're going to apply for a house, we're looking at that number after those deductions. So that's what I advise with self-employment.
Okay. And let's see if we have any more questions.
Madam First Vice President, we do not have any more questions.
Okay, excellent. Well, I'm really excited to get to our next speaker. She is a phenomenal attorney at law. Her name is Varden Blanchard, and she's going to help us with real estate law and really, educating us on why we should all get a lawyer, and why that is unique, that option is unique to New Jersey. Varden?
Thank you, Sharnae, for that introduction. I want to say thank you so much for having me here. It is a pleasure to be able to speak to all these people who have logged on and taken time out in their very busy days to log on to this program, which I think is a very important program to get ourselves educated and to start building wealth for our generation and the next generation thereafter. I seriously believe that becoming a homeowner, especially for us as minorities and as women, is more than just owning a home. It is really the first step in laying a firm foundation for building generational wealth for our families and for our financial security and for the financial security of our families as well. So you've heard my fellow panelists talk about the various steps in becoming a homeowner. Ms. Frank talked about the financial aspect. Ms. Taylor talked about the process of searching for that home that you are keen on purchasing. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the legal issues that arise and why it's important, once you have honed in on a home that you want to purchase or you're thinking about purchasing, why you should take the time to also talk and consult with an attorney. A lot of times people will shy away from that. They'll say that it is cost prohibitive, but you know what? Buying a home, purchasing a home, it is one of the largest investments that you are going to make during your lifetime. So the most important thing is keeping that in perspective and making that decision to consult with an attorney. Paying for an attorney is going to buy you sleep and sanity once the process is over. What is the importance of the attorney and what does that attorney do for you? First of all, Ms. Taylor is an excellent realtor, but she's not your attorney. Ms. Frank is excellent in her work as a broker, but she's not your attorney either. Your attorney cannot provide you with legal advice as you go through this process. I can do that, or somebody else who's an attorney can do that, because that's what we're here to do. We are here to work exclusively for you, to guide you through the process, and to make sure that after you have signed this contract and you've gone through the rest of the process, once you get those keys and you're ready to enter that home, you're entering that home with peace of mind. Why is that? Okay. What is a contract? A contract is a document that is entered into by two parties during the real estate contract for the purchase of an asset. The asset, the home. In that document, there's a whole lot of wording and contingencies and things that have to be done, time frames to do things in, and it's signed by the buyer and it's signed by the seller. Two ways of looking at this. I always tell clients the best option is to actually consult your attorney before you sign on the dotted line of that contract. But in the event that you didn't do that, you still have time to consult with an attorney. Why is that? Ms. Taylor just mentioned the 3-day attorney review. Now that's actually very important and it is very special to New Jersey. I'm a native of New York, but when I came here, I found out that unlike many states, New Jersey, the buyer or the seller that is a party to the contract may enter into a valid binding contract that is actually prepared by their realtor. And then you can have that contract reviewed by your attorney after the execution of that contract. What do I mean by execution? That means you've signed as the buyer or seller. That's what it means. You've put your signature on that dotted line. When does that 3-day attorney review period start? That's very important for you to understand because it's a short period of time. 3 days is not a lot of time. And the clock starts to run on that 3-day attorney review from the date of the last signature. That is whether you are the buyer or the seller. So whoever is last, that's when the clock starts to run. As soon as that clock starts to run, you head to an attorney. Why? Because the attorney is going to look at that document that you've signed or are preparing to sign with a fine-tooth comb. He or she is going to go through every single line, making sure that the terms and the conditions and the contingencies that are placed in that contract are to your benefit. They will negotiate on your behalf. They will make concessions on your behalf. They will ask the other party for things that have to be done. And if it can't be done, then they're going to ask them to set aside certain monies or timeframes that are going to benefit you in the purchase that you are making. Your attorney provides you with exclusive representation. And as I said before, when you are buying a home or when you are selling a home, you want that somebody who's going to be exclusively on your side, who's going to tell you exactly what you need to know and exactly what you need to do.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. Now we are taking questions for Barden Blanchard, attorney at law. Are there any questions? Please drop them in the Q&A or the chat on Facebook Live.
Madam First Vice President, we do have a question.
Okay.
The question is regarding legal representation within the 3-day attorney review period. Someone wants to know, can a realtor write an attorney review letter or does it have to be written by an attorney?
The reason why it's called the attorney review period is because the attorney is the one who's supposed to look it over and write a letter on your behalf. As I indicated before, look, I respect all the panelists here with me. We all have our own part to play. We each have a role and it's designated and it's driven by knowledge and experience. I'm not a realtor. I don't know the first thing about showing you a home. I'm not a broker. I'm an attorney. We all do what we know. So therefore, when I said to you that your attorney is not the realtor, your realtor is not the attorney, that means the attorney is the person who's going to look over the documents for you. The attorney is going to be the one who's going to look line by line to see if there are some clauses in there that are not necessarily going to be for your benefit. Example, a lot of times I see contracts that says as is. That may not be to your benefit, or that may be to your benefit if you're looking to buy a home to turn around and flip it and you have experience doing it. but it really is situational. So when you sit down with your attorney is going to look and is going to talk to you, is going to ask you questions about your objective, your purpose, what you're looking for. And based on that, they're going to know how to negotiate with the other side in order to get you the best deal possible for that contract that you are about to sign or you're thinking about signing.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Yes, Madam First Vice President, there was a question about the down deposit, the down payment that has to be made when buying a home. This would be addressed to Ms. Frank or Ms. Taylor. The question is, what is typical for a down payment?
Great question. Diane?
A down payment, or we're talking earnest? Well, a down payment, it depends on what loan program you have. If you have an FHA loan, the minimum down payment is 3.5%. If you qualify for conventional, the down payment is 5%. Conventional is definitely a better place to be in because your bid or your pre-approval is going to show that you're eligible for a conventional. So the sellers are looking at that a little bit more favorably. Your credit has to be a little higher with a conventional. Well, your debt to income ratio has to be a little lower, should I say, meaning that your monthly income compared to your debt has to be at a certain percentage. FHA is easier to qualify for, and FHA is a federal or government-backed loan. So that's why you only need 3.5% for that particular program. Conventional 5%, FHA 3.5%. There's also USDA loans. Those type of loans, you don't have to put anything down, but those loans, the house itself has to be in a rural area, which the government deems rural. Now, rural doesn't necessarily mean that there's, cows out there. You'd be surprised of what, some houses that are considered rural. And, your realtor would know if you were looking at a house that was eligible for a USDA. And of course, a VA loan. VAs, if you're a veteran, you don't have to put anything down. So those are the different type of programs or loans, rather.
Now, you mentioned earnest deposit. Why don't you explain that to our audience as well?
An earnest deposit is a show of good faith. When you go into contract, when both parties have signed and you go into contract, the seller is looking for you to, just show some effort. That could run from anywhere from 1,000, sometimes 5,000, but that depends on the negotiation with the realtor and with both realtors, the selling realtor and the buying realtor. So they kind of negotiate that. But that's also something that has to be in a cashier's check that is held in escrow, meaning it's not cashed. It's just held with the title company until the transaction is complete. And that whatever amount of money that is gets deducted from your closing costs because you've already put it out.
And what happens to that deposit if, God forbid, the transaction is incomplete? Would they get their money back?
We can let the attorney answer that.
Varden, can you help us out here?
Certainly. Well, you're supposed to get it back, but it depends on where you are in the process. So, for example, if everything works out fine, then you're just going to move to the next phase of closing and home ownership. But let's say that one of the contingencies, and usually like a contingency will be something about, we go sign a contract and you'll say, well, if the home inspection comes back and everything is kind of okay, then we're good. But let's say the home inspection comes back and there's been like major damage to the house or the structure of the house that is exorbitant. You can make a demand, and you should make a demand at that point for the return of your entire monies back. and you should get it. Now you have some people who will sometimes try to give you an excuse as to why it is they should be able to hold on and say, well, it's something that is not as major, it's really minor. We can set aside monies for you to cure that defect, but that's not always necessarily the case. Usually you will get your money back with no issues. But like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say there haven't been instances where you have people on the other side who will try to make it difficult for you to get your monies back.
All right, and I'm going to reach back out to our WIN question representative. Any more questions?
Yes, Madam First Vice President, there is a question regarding the certificate of occupancy. We are going to direct that question to Ms. Taylor. So we do have a question regarding the job of the person getting a certificate of occupancy. And the question is, whose job is it to get the certificate of occupancy?
Well, that depends on the contract, because in some instances, it can be, in most instances, it's the seller's job to get the certificate of occupancy. However, there are sometimes the seller requires the buyers to get the certificate of occupancy. For instance, if you're buying a home and in the contract, it's as is, most of the time, it'll also be a clause in there that the buyer is responsible for the certificate of occupancy. Now, the standard contracts automatically have the clause in there for the seller, but there is a section where you write in when you want the buyer to be responsible. And most of the time the buyer will agree, they'll get the certificate of occupancy, and depending on which counties you live in, there's also a building code that the homes have to be up to as well. So, it depends on, your contract, because it could be the seller or the buyer.
In the event that it is the buyer's responsibility, if they're buying an as-is home and it says that very clearly in their contract, would their realtor assist them in that process, securing a certificate of occupancy? Or is that something that the buyer has to be knowledgeable with and coordinate themselves?
Well, like I said before, the realtor is here to guide you. So your realtor should be assisting you with that process. Me personally, I call the townships to find out how much the certificate of occupancies are. I find out because if you're getting it from the fire department, of course, there are certain times when they allow you to come and drop off the checks. There are certain times when they're going to be at the house to actually do their certificate of occupancy. Sometimes they require a person there. Sometimes they don't. You don't have to be there. They'll tell you that they're going to come and do the inspection, and they're going to leave, the certificate on the kitchen counter. So I tend to, get involved with that and find out exactly what's going to be done and what needs to be done. And then I explain that to my buyers and sellers.
All right. And we're going to just take one more question if we have it. If not, we will proceed.
Yes, Madam First Vice President, we do have another question. And the question is regarding looking for a realtor with different organizations. Is there a specific organization that can help you look for a realtor?
Yes, there is. There's the National Association of Realtors. Each county also has their own they have their own association of realtors. So depending on which county you are, I know that in the area where I am, you have Camden County and Burlington County. We share the same realtor organization. So those organizations can help you find a realtor in the area.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. The WIN committee does want to recognize the South Jersey NAREB. And they do have a Facebook page with the South Jersey NAREB, and they also have a website that can direct you to realtors of color,
which we will have on our resources document that we'll be sharing with all of our participants tonight, because we really do appreciate that you're sticking it in with us. We have one question that came in, and I think it's super important. Everyone wants to know, especially first-time home buyers. They hear about, oh, there's money out here. You can get free money. You can get money towards closing. And so I would like to direct this to Diane to talk about programs, grant programs for first-time home buyers or other type of buyers that provide assistance towards closing costs. Can you kind of tell us the pros and the cons of those things? And if you know of any, or where you can direct folks to if they are interested?
I know there was one for the county, or certain counties. From what I understand, the website was not up anymore. I do know this new president has made an initiative to get more programs out. Again, like I stated earlier, just know what you're getting in with the programs. Usually they're first-time home buyers. First-time home buyer programs, you can be considered a first-time home buyer if you haven't owned a home in the last, I believe, 3 years. Okay. Usually the programs are, they have their own, they're teaching you about home buying. So the ones that I knew of or have dealt with, they give you $10,000 towards down payment and closing. Know that those programs also take longer to close because they're getting money from another source in order to close the loan. So they are going to take a little longer. The average is 45 days to close a loan, 30 to 45. If it goes smoothly, should be 30. But with those programs, they take longer. So you have to know that. And like I said, no matter what program you use, your interest rate is higher. So you are paying. So I just suggest that you be ready. Income tax comes around, save your money. Why pay so much more? I mean, if you need a program, you need a program. It just is what it is. But, save your money, be ready. Don't get ready, be ready. Stay ready. You know what I'm saying? Because it's just, why pay for that, over 30 by your interest being higher? Why pay in the long 30-year mortgage or 15-year mortgage? Why pay for that? You know what I'm saying? But if you follow me, I definitely will. My mortgage company currently does not have a program, but I have been told that they were going to get one in New Jersey. We're licensed in several states, but I heard that we were going to, and I will definitely post it as soon as, it comes up. I'll definitely make it available.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. So we are done with this section of questions, but please, please, please stay on the line after the program. A few of our panelists will be hanging out with us, addressing all other questions that we did not get to during this segment. As we move forward, I want to ask our panelists, as well as our participants, if you guys have any feedback. Let's talk. It's Women's History Month. We just came out of Black History Month. And, as a community, we have to ask ourselves, what are we doing to build wealth? What are we doing to truly progress forward? How can we find financial equity? How can we get racial equity? How can more women of color utilize real estate to better leverage and build a big life with financial freedom? I'm actually going to start with Farden, if you don't mind, and go down. And of course, please chime in the Q&A, Facebook Live, chats. Let us know what your thoughts are on this topic as well. We'll be sharing it.
I hold the belief that, especially for people of color, for Black women, for striving women, it's important for us to be able to build wealth for ourselves, for our children, for the generations that are to come after us. And I do believe that home ownership is the first step. It's not the only step, but it is a big first step and trying to lay the foundation for building that type of wealth. Because when you make that kind of purchase and investment, you're setting yourself up to be able to do other things. You're building equity in the home that you buy. You can turn around and then use that equity to pay down debt, to increase your savings, to invest in other things, to even buy a home in a different location that's going to have even more value. And you build upon that. So for people of color, especially for women, I think it's important to be able to do that. I think there's been a lot of women who have been doing that. And although the struggles continue, there continues to be disparity in the purchasing of homes and getting loans through conventional means, but there are other ways to do it as well. It's good. It's a good example for your children, and it's a good investment for yourself and for them.
Madam Chair, could you repeat your question for the panelists, please?
Oh, thank you so much. Technology. So I wanted to ask Diane if she would like to, chime in on how women of color, particularly Black women, can utilize real estate to build wealth. I know, Diane, you are quite the investor yourself. So, as someone who's actually doing this, what can you provide our audience tonight?
Especially, since this is Women's Month and we're focusing on us, we got to live somewhere, right? When we're renting, we're never seeing that money again. We're not seeing that money again. If you own a home, you're investing in yourself, right? So, people, I've talked to people that actually think about, duplexes. Think about it. You have 2 units in a duplex. You could live in one and rent out the other one, the other apartment, the other unit, at least 2. I'm saying you can live in one and you can price that second apartment, to have enough money, or at least to pay half of the mortgage on the whole house. So that way you're getting income, as well as you're getting income monthly. You're getting a monthly income from that renter, because if that mortgage is, say, $500, you can charge that renter $1,000, and that could be paying for both of your, the entire mortgage. I mean, of course, you have to do your research on those type of things, but it is definitely a doable thing. I've seen it done. I'm doing it. I don't live in a duplex, but that's just an idea. But I mean, it's out there. This is a wealth building process. You use it, to your advantage. And like I said, you have to live somewhere. So, for us as a community, a lot of times we just get stuck in this credit thing. The credit for us is sometimes the barrier, because again, things happen, but there is always a comeback. There's, don't ever, even if you have lost a home and you're in an apartment, don't ever get discouraged. Just work on what you need to do to build that credit back up to where you can be in a position to do these type of things. If you look into something, if like the example that I just gave you, as far as a duplex, since you're living in it, you could get an FHA loan for that. An FHA loan, you have to live in the property. So you're living in the property, right? But that second apartment may be your rental. And to qualify, I could use 75% of that rental income towards your income before you even get the house, just to qualify you for the house. So, it can be done. wealth is, there's plenty of people that have built wealth off of real estate. So, don't ever think it's out of you can start off small. You don't have to get a $300,000 house for your first home. You can get an $80,000 house, live it in a few years and walk away with $30,000, because of the equity, and then build from there. Or you can live in a house, you can take out a home equity loan or cash out and then buy your first rental. Okay. So again, there's ways of doing this. Like I said, but that credit for us is always, it just seems like the first hurdle. And also student loans. Student loans is another big thing for us. We come out of school where we got these, our sisters we all have these bright dreams and, aspirations, but we have that student loan debt. Don't run from your student loans, pay them, pay them. And, if you're in a debt type of situation where it's overwhelming and you're avoiding those, collection calls, don't run from them, run to them. What can I do to make this not hit my credit? Okay. Because, again, that credit is so important. So don't get boggled down into, well, I can't because of this and I can't because of that. You can. And if you've made mistakes in the past, there is always a comeback.
I love that. There's always a comeback. And I wish I had this webinar with this lovely information when I was a first-time home buyer. I love the idea of purchasing a duplex or a property that could also produce income for you. So I really encourage everyone to take heed, write down some of these notes, check out our recordings. Char, would you like to add anything before we move on from this roundtable discussion on women and wealth building through real estate?
I would, to piggyback off of what Diane was saying as far as investing. Like she was saying, you can get a duplex and you can rent out part of it. It's also a good way to teach your children responsibility. I mean, because children grow up, and what do you do when your children are adults? You can't put them in the street. So you could have a duplex, you could live in part of it. They can have, the other half of it, and they can pay you rent. It's a way of teaching them responsibility. And then, also there's plenty of things out there where you can learn how to invest. You could buy properties very low if you're handy, because a lot of women, even though a lot of people think of it as men, but a lot of women are handy and they know how to fix things. They know how to do contracting work. And if you're that type of person, you could buy a small house, like Diane said, doesn't have to be big. You could buy a 2-bedroom home for depending on the area. You could get, a home for like $70,000, $80,000, and you could flip it, sell it for like $125,000, $150,000. And then, and then right there, you made a profit. So, it's all about what you know to do, what you know how to do. And, I always say, continue to educate yourself, always continue learning how to do things, because there is a way to make things happen. I mean, home ownership is always, a good way to start off, because it's an investment in yourself. And even once you buy a home, you can build on your own home. You can, create an in-law suite. So as long as you have the space and the property to do so, there's always, different ways to build wealth for ourselves. So don't ever think that you can't do it, because you can.
Wow, thank you so much. This was wonderful. I want to check in with our WIN moderator for the questions, our representative tonight, to see if there are any feedback on this topic related to women and wealth building through real estate.
Yes, this question will be directed towards Farden Blanchard, the attorney. The question is about women owning real estate and leaving it as generational wealth through their families to come. So the question is, Farden, if someone buys a home and they buy it with someone else, does it automatically go to that other person upon the other buyer's death? So I'll rephrase the question. If two people buy a home and one person dies, does it automatically go to the other person?
That depends on how the deed is titled. So usually, for example, if a person is the spouse and you're married at the time that you purchased the home, and the deed says, I'll use my name, Fred M. Blanchard and my husband Andrew with rights of survivorship. If I die before my husband, because the deed is titled with rights of survivorship, my interest will automatically pass to my husband upon my death. And all he'll have to do is get the deed retitled. And then 100% of the ownership interest of that house will then pass to him, and vice versa. However, let's say I buy a home, and I'll just choose Charnay. We go into business together and we buy a home, and we own the home as tenants in common. I own 50% of the home. Charnay owns 50% of the home. If I die before Charnay, my 50% does not automatically pass to Charnay. My 50% will pass to my heirs, my family members, and vice versa. Now, when you go into business, so let's say I wanted to have a real estate business, and I'm entering into that agreement with Charnay or whoever my business partner happens to be. There are ways of avoiding pitfalls of ownership of properties where you don't have an operating agreement. So the best course of action in those types of arrangements would be for myself and Charnay to enter into a business agreement that outlines what happens to the properties that we have in common as part of that business. If you fail to do that, then there are going to be issues should one of us pass and we bought these properties and the deed says as tenants in common. That's why the roles of attorneys become very important, because it's great. There are many opportunities for us to be able to make money, to invest, and to build wealth. But in order to ensure that that wealth is passed on, we have to set up our businesses correctly. Just like anything else, you have to have your incorporation papers. You have to determine what kind of business, what kind of entity you're going to build. Are you going to do it as a limited liability company? Are you going to do it as a partnership? Are you going to do it as an S corporation? So when you are entering into business with your friends or family, even if it's a family member, I always tell people, even with family, if you're going to enter into like a real estate venture and you're going to start buying properties in common, that you should have an agreement and you should go to an attorney in order to have that document drafted properly. And I always tell people it's good that each person has their own attorney to make sure that each person's interests are safeguarded in case there is an issue later on.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Any last questions or comments related to the roundtable discussion?
Not at this time, Madam First Vice President. We did have another question regarding mortgage, but we will wait for you to direct us when you're ready to take a question on that.
Thank you. Please, please, please sit tight. We will be addressing some other questions, revisiting some topics. If you missed the beginning of the program, no worries. I would like to thank my panelists formally tonight for joining me, Charnay Robinson Williams. I'm the first vice president and WIN chair. So thank you so much for joining us. This is our first webinar, so I hope it was something that our community needed to hear tonight. I hope that we educated some folks in the community. And I hope that this is not the last time that we connect you with the community and vice versa. Please, please, please connect with all of these lovely Black women in real estate, from law to mortgage to realtors. We really want to make that connection. Let me do some quick housekeeping. I want to let you guys know that we here at the Camden County East NAACP love, love, love new and returning members. We know that COVID has kind of gotten in the way, but we still count on membership. It is the lifeline of the NAACP, and it is the only way that we're able to continue programming, educational programming, as well as civil rights work here locally in the community. 3 easy steps to become a member. You can just go right to our personal website, cceNAACP.org/join-donate. The annual membership due is only $30. And if you are interested in joining the Women in the NAACP committee, you can add an additional $10 to become active in our committee. Our branch meetings are held every third Monday, rain, shine, it doesn't matter. We are in our homes, COVID safe, socially distanced via Zoom. In order to get that link to join our monthly meetings for the Camden County East NAACP, please subscribe to our website so you can get on our mailing list that has the meeting link that comes out. Again, our website is cceNAACP.org. Last but not least, the Women in the NAACP WIN committee will be hosting another event next Monday. I'm super excited about this event. It's called Career After COVID. It's pretty much a resume refresher. How to build a resume that stands out. I know many of you may be working from home, or you may have added a new skill set or even a new job during this pandemic. And we want to take everything that we learned, we want to take all those lemons from COVID-19 and turn it into lemonade. And so we're going to be speaking with Hawa Muhammad, who is the CEO and founder of Pink Trumpet, which is a lovely organization that helps individuals get their career back on track, revamp LinkedIn profiles, resumes, etc. We'll also have a couple of giveaways on Monday as well for some free services. So please register for that. All the information can be found on our Facebook. That's happening March 16th, which is next Monday. And finally, I would like to open this back up for all of our panelists who are interested in staying on. Please, please, please do not, feel mandated to do so, but we want to address any questions that have come along. And actually, there have been quite a few people, Diane, who would like for you to review your tips slide. So I'm going to go back to that and start with you, because they may have missed it a little bit earlier. Okay.
Sure.
Madam Chair, while you're going back to that slide, Ms. Frank, could you answer the question about mortgage insurance? You talked earlier about getting an FHA loan versus a conventional loan. And the question is, with an FHA loan, is mortgage insurance mandatory?
Yes.
And what is mortgage insurance?
Mortgage insurance is mandatory on an FHA loan. You have to pay mortgage insurance on an FHA for the life of the loan. Basically, it's a government-backed loan. So if you run into trouble, you might miss a payment or two, they work with you. They will work with you. So they may even put, your payments on the back of the loan. They work with you. So yes, it's required. On a conventional loan, if you're putting 20% down, you do not have to pay mortgage insurance. You're only required to put 5% down on a conventional loan. But when you get up to, you've paid 20% of your loan within, the next years, then that mortgage insurance falls off.
Thank you, Ms. Frank.
You're welcome.
You can now address the tips that you had on the slide that's showing.
Okay, so we talked about credit pretty much a lot. The credit aspect, again, so important. Credit Karma is also a good app to use to monitor your credit. Now, that's not your score, but it gives you a good idea. Again, the mortgage industry does a hard pull, meaning that we pull all from the three credit bureaus: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. If you go to Experian.com, Equifax.com, and TransUnion.com, I see that one might be missed. You can create an account with them. Those are the scores that we use. And we have to pull all three of them to get your score. Again, if there's two buyers, say your husband and wife, you each have 3 scores, right? So we're going by the lowest middle. So we go by the middle score. Again, if it's a 601, 602, 603, your score is a 602. So that's how and if your husband had a 701, 702, 703, we're using that 602 because that's the lowest middle. So that's how multiple buyers work. They can be up to 4 buyers on one home. That's another tip. So again, credit is definitely important. The mortgage programs, again, know what you're getting into. Your interest rate is higher. Most of those programs, they offer you $10,000. The one program that I was using with the county, you went to a class. You sat in the class. This is prior to COVID. You sat in the class for a day. You did, you listened to their presentation. They sent you home to your computer. You would go through some classes or some information on there. You would take a test. You have to pass the class. You bring back your certificate to them, and they would give you a $10,000 certificate that would last a year. And you would use that towards your down payment and closing. Some of the programs, you don't have to do all of that, but you definitely have to go through a home buying per se seminar. And I know now, since it is COVID, I'm sure everything is online, but generally they're usually for $10,000. Again, with the credit score, some different lenders, like I said, go down a little lower, so they'll go down to a 580. But again, if they're going that low, that means you can't have a lot of debt, because we're looking at the debt to income ratio, which is huge, and that's such a calculation. I don't really want to get into that, but you can go down as low as a 580. Some houses may go a little lower. Every mortgage company also is not the same. Okay. There is some general things like the tips that I told you about: bankruptcy, foreclosure, student loans. Those are across the board. You have to think about, you're borrowing from the government or from a bank. So if you're in default with them, if you're trying to get an FHA loan, which is a government loan, and you're in default on your student loan, the government's looking like, well, we just gave you, you're in default with us already. So that's the concept there. So again, you have to be in good standing.
Now, Ms. Frank, we do have a very specific question. You talked about student loan debt, and you talked about checking your score. There is an attendee who has this question. They checked their score on Experian and Equifax. They had a very high score. Their student loan debt was not on that credit report. So they felt very confident. They went to apply for a loan, and then after they applied for a loan, there was a secondary check that did show up their student loan debt. So are there 2 different type of credit reports that lenders use?
There's not a different type of credit report. But again, we're pulling from all three, and each credit bureau has their own report. So you have Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Each of them are giving you a score based on what they have. You know, credit is such a different, it's such its own animal, I should say. You know, they have their own ways of scoring and so forth. But if you have a student loan and you have a student loan, it should be on all three of the reports. So there's also, when we pull your credit report for that pre-approval, and if someone doesn't specifically ask you, are you in default? There's another avenue or something else we use called caveers that is going to tell us whether you're in default on your student loan. So if you have a student loan, you know what I mean? If you went to school, if you took out a loan, you have a student, and if you haven't been paying. So go into it with the knowledge of, I know I have to get this taken care of. If there's a student loan still on your credit report that you've paid, then you provide the proof. You go to the credit bureaus and you produce the proof that you have paid on it. I'm a stickler. I save everything. I remember one time I was doing a refinance, and with refinances, a lot of times the closer will come to your home. So you're just sitting at your own table with the closer. And I had a debt on my credit that I forgot about. It was only like $157, I believe. And he came, he said, you have this debt. You should really, I don't know, they really need to have this taken care of. I went right upstairs. I pulled out my file. Oh no, I paid that debt. The receipt was right there within 5 minutes. He was like, oh, so, if you're paying off a debt, something that was on your credit, you keep that paperwork. You be a stickler about those type of things. And I'm sure with a student loan, as much as, student loans are, if you've paid that debt off, you keep that paper. You get a file, you keep that paper, because sometimes things don't get taken off of your credit like it's supposed to. So again, I don't know if I mentioned this, but annualcreditreport.com is also another report that you can pull. You're entitled to a free credit report every year, every 12 months rather. So your year might not be somebody else's year, but you're entitled to one every year. You pull that report and that shows everything on your credit. It doesn't give you the score, but it shows what's on there. So be diligent about that as well. Pull that report, know what's on there, because they do make mistakes. Even there's things where when we go through the loan process, we have the buyers look at some of the things that we see on the report that's not explained. It could be addresses that you never lived at, that affects your score, believe it or not. And you can let them know or let us know, never lived at that address, or I lived at this address. It was only for a couple months because I got mail there or what have you. Sometimes it's just, especially if you're in the mortgage process, sometimes it's just a matter of explanation. You just got to explain it. But the credit bureaus do make, mistakes. So pull that annualcreditreport.com, pull that report every year and know what's on there.
Thank you, Diane. I want to see if there were any questions for Farden or Char Taylor before we close out tonight's webinar Q&A session.
No, Madam First Vice President, there are no more questions.
Well, it seems like we have officially come to an end. I want to thank my panelists again, and I would love to thank all of the participants that have stayed online with us for our after party of question and answer session. It seems like Diane, you had a lot of questions tonight, so I just want to let everyone know we will be providing contact information for our panelists in our resource document, which will be emailed to you based on whatever you use in the registration form. And we'll also have a resource document on our Facebook page posted later this week, as well as the live recording that you can reference. I hope you all have a lovely night, and remember to become an NAACP member if you have not preferably the Camden County East branch. And we at the Women of the NAACP committee, we want to say thank you and good night. Take care.
It was nice meeting all of you.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Good night.
Bye, good night.
For those of you who are, oh.